Hi, it's Clark on Temptress. Many months ago, I did a video on how to balance a lithium iron phosphate battery. If you buy a new battery, these all-in-one, all set up, what everybody's buying today, they don't come balanced. It's important to balance it. Well, I did the whole video. I described how to do it, but I left out an important thing. Why should you bother? As many of you know, I, like a lot of people on YouTube, have a Patreon account. And people who sign up on that account can get into various tiers. They get a hold of me, ask me questions. Well, one of my patrons just sent me a note and said that he was confused about balancing. And not only did he have a little trouble with how to balance, but needed to know why. And it occurred to me, I never covered that. Very remiss of me, but that video is long enough as it is, and there was enough to go over. So in this video, we're not going to cover how to balance a lithium iron phosphate battery. That'll be covered in that video that I did a while ago. Watch it, still very good. But we're going to talk about why you should bother. So, why should you bother? Here's a lithium iron phosphate battery. I've taken the top off it so we can see inside. And what we have here are 4 cells. They're prismatic, so they're rectangular. We've got one here, one here, one here, and one here. There are bus bars kind of soldered onto them. So they're in series. So this is the most positive cell. And then the negative side of that is connected to the positive next one. From there to there. Down, down, and then this is the most negative. The negative goes through this thing called the BMS. That's kind of the brains of the battery, and that does a lot of work for us. It does not know how to stop charging a battery properly for long life. It knows how to keep the cells from exploding, from bursting into flames, from getting charged so much that they actually vent. Strangely, from discharging too far. When your lithium iron phosphate battery goes to 0 volts all of a sudden, there's still power left. The BMS is shut down because you're getting close to this low number. And if you ever go right down to real 0 in a cell, it's kind of over. And a lot of them will protect from charging while frozen. I've covered all that before. The other thing a BMS does is it's supposed to do a good job at balancing the cells to make them all the same amount of charge. Now they're in series, so if you apply current between these 2 poles, or through here, but anyway, between all the cells, the same current is showing up at every cell. So all the battery's cells are growing at the same rate. If they're all at the same point, that's great. They all do this. But if they're not balanced and one is ahead, this kind of happens. And that's a problem, and we'll go into depth about why that's a problem. So the BMS should, when it notices it, take power out of the top cell, at least. There's another thing called active balancing, and it takes the power out of the top cell and puts it into other cells. That sounds efficient, but it's completely unnecessary to be efficient, because this is not a lot of power to do the balancing. Why they do it is because when you just take the power out, that energy has to go somewhere. It has to become heat. Getting rid of heat is a problem. So it's actually easier from a heat point of view to push it into another cell. I'm developing and working on a new BMS. And it's going to do a lot of things that none of these can do. It's going to be able to actually know how to charge the battery and take care of the battery all by itself. It's going to be able to let the battery be mixed with other batteries of different kinds. And it's going to balance in a completely different way that I'm not going to go into, but it'll be better. But we got what we got, so let's talk about what we got. Let's talk about what happens when you charge a cell. For this video, we're going to talk about the cells individually. We're going to talk about 12-volt batteries just because those are the numbers that come to my mind. But if you have a 24, it's just 8 cells instead of 4. And if you have a 48, it's just 16 cells instead of 4. If we had a cell they're never dead, never ever take one to 0, but it's well discharged. It should be disconnected. Let's say it's around 2.5 volts, somewhere down there. That's a cell that could exist. Let's say, and it's a common thing to say, never take them over 3.65 volts. Most BMSs on the market will shut down if any one cell goes over 3.65 volts. So I put power in, and the voltage goes up as there's more and more power in the battery. Okay, on the bottom here, I'm going to make a percent of charge on the x-axis. Let's say, well, we'll say 0 down here. We never really want to go to 0, and 0 would be 0 volts, but that's going to be practical 0 when the BMS shuts off. And we'll say 100% here, 105, that's just an arbitrary number. I don't really know the right percentage, but that's overcharged. And just for convenience, we'll say this is 90. If I apply power current to the cells and they take a charge, it would stand to reason the voltage would go up as more charge is in the cells. And lead does that pretty much linearly. It's not exactly, but it's way more than lithium. Lithium does a weird thing. You start applying power and very quickly the voltage goes up. Then the voltage barely goes up throughout most of the charge. It stays really, 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 really flat. And then after you're at 100%, it goes up again quite fast. The voltages in here where the bulk of the charging is happening are probably around 3.1 to say 3.3 volts. This is actually great because throughout the whole discharge cycle, it just goes back the other way and the voltage doesn't really go down. So you're getting a lot of power. Also, when you put power in, for the most part, it's taking power at very low voltages. It doesn't have that charge way up here, discharge way down here thing lead does, because the difference in those two voltages times the current is the wattage you're wasting in the system. So these are really efficient. This is great. There's a little more to it than that. If it was that simple, life would be simpler. That's if you charge at a certain rate of charge. We call that the C rating. And this is an arbitrary drawing. I'm just giving rules of thumb here for understanding. But let's say that is 0.2 C. If you charged faster, I guess red for faster, huh? Hot. You get a similar curve. So like let's say we charge at 0.5 C. We're going to get something more like that. And if we were to charge slower, we get something more like that. For any percent of charge, the voltage could be a wide band, and that has to do with the speed of charge. There's actually a few other parameters involved, but that's as deep as I'm going to go into that. For this discussion, that's fine. If we charge one cell up to 100%, it's going to be, let's say, 13.4. That's probably around 100% for a nice slow charge, or maybe allowed to rest a little bit after the charge. If we charge just a little beyond there, damage happens. The cells don't like to be held at these higher voltages, and they particularly don't like it when you're still putting current into them and making the voltage go up. And they particularly don't like it when you're at these higher voltages and the battery is full and it doesn't have any place to put the power chemically. That power does mischief. So anytime you're charging a cell or a battery over 100%, you are doing damage. Now, it doesn't kill it right away. It's not like charging it up to 4 volts. That will kill it right away. But it's accumulative. I usually tell my people that ask, it's kind of like smoking cigarettes. You smoke 10 cigarettes in your entire lifetime, that's lost in the noise. But if you smoke every day, you're going to know it, in a few years. Well, that's what's going on here. So we want to really minimize the time we're up here for every individual cell. Now, we have to go up there to know if they're in balance, because if we're down here, the difference between, say, 95 and 100 is not even measurable. So if we had two cells at 95 and two at 100, we'd say, oh, they're all perfectly balanced at 95 and 100. But if we crank them up to the higher voltages, they start separating from each other in voltage. We'll go into more detail. We could have one cell that is at 100% and it's 3.4-ish volts, where we have another one that's a little bit more charged, like at 105, and that could be right up at the top of 3.65. So here's what happens in the real world. Let's say you don't balance your batteries. You just let things happen the way they are. You grab them, you shove them in, and you use them. Well, if you charge them really, really hard, this is how you'll know that they're out of balance, but you probably won't even do that. But in our model, we're going to do that so that we know what's going on with the cells. Let's say we just charge this battery until the BMS cries uncle and shuts down the ability to charge it. It's going to happen when one of the cells is at 3.65 volts for this BMS. Well, let's just for convenience always say that cell 1 is ahead of the game and cell 4 is the last one. They won't be organized like that. It'll be all over the place, but for us, that'll be great. So we charge it up and the cells stop taking power because the BMS shuts down, and we really quickly look at our app on our phone and get the cell voltages, and what do we find? We could find that the top cell is 3.65. Let's say the next one is 3.55, 3.4, and 3.25. Well, we look at that and we can see that we're quite a bit out of balance. 3.65 to 3.25, that's a difference of 0.4 volts. Way more than I like to see in a battery. And if we were to add all those numbers together, we're going to get the voltage that would be on the outside if we checked. And what's that come out to be? 13.85 volts. All we know there is that it's wrong. Hopefully the BMS is seeing that it's wrong too, and it's starting to take power away from that top cell. But that's going to take a while, possibly days and days. A lot of these are really, really slow in their balancing. They say that you just charge them up twice and it'll be balanced. No, go in and look. Nothing like that at all. I've had some of the really big batteries. This is a 300 amp hour battery. I've had them take more than a week. I'm actually holding the cells up in the danger zone. They're smoking cigarettes for a solid week, 24 hours a day, to get them to balance with the BMS. I hate that. I really, really hate that. You can always pop the top off and manually balance it. I have other videos on that. Okay, enough of that. But let's see what would happen if we didn't even know that. Same batteries, same situation. I'm going to make guesses at what would happen at a more reasonable voltage. It would be reasonable if you didn't have a bank manager. My little commercial here, this is my bank manager. It actually can tell on a balanced battery when it's fully charged. And it will stop the charging, and it doesn't care about the rate of charge. It doesn't care about the history. It takes care of all of those things. And it's really, really good at knowing when you're full charged and no damage is going to happen. But if you didn't have one of those, and you have some gear that says, charge to a voltage. What voltage do you want to charge to? Well, you got to pick one. And let's say you arbitrarily chose 13.8 volts. That's considered conservative. Shouldn't be hurting the cells too bad at 13.8. I do want to mention overcharging causes damage. Undercharging cells repeatedly also is a problem. It causes memory. And when the cells get memory, they start looking like they're fully charged when they're really not. So you end up losing capacity. Let's say you took it up to 13.8 volts. Now, I got a cheat sheet over there I got to look at for this. That would be something to get the same kind of a ratio that the high cell would be like 3.55 volts. The next one could be like 3.48, 3.42, and 3.35 volts. The total of that is 13.8. If we just went a little further, the BMS would be shutting down. But we think we're being really conservative. And for this guy, we're being way better than conservative. This guy if we kept doing this every day, he's going to start getting memory. He's not being charged completely. This guy is being charged at 3.55, almost the absolute limit. And that'll keep happening for quite a while. Maybe eventually it'll get balanced on its own with this bad of a condition, but it's not good. So we're doing some damage to this cell. We're doing a different kind of damage to this cell. These guys are probably pretty happy with their life. And this is what would happen if we did nothing. What I do is I balance the cells before I put them into service. And I try to do that for cells that I'm reviewing with the BMS itself. But if the BMS is a total loss, and some of them are bad, like that LI time, I ended up throwing it away, putting a different BMS in the battery. And I've had some others, the epoch's real bad. I think that they promised to send me a new 460 battery, and now they're just refusing to. Either they haven't solved their problem and you shouldn't be buying them, or they're just not being good actors, But anyway, their BMS that they were putting out last summer was unable to balance the battery that I had. So if you open the case, you can put a resistor across or take your charger and just charge one cell individually, and for whatever reason, get them balanced. So let's say this one's balanced now, and let's take a look at what that would look like. If you went to that other video, I kind of show that you know you're balanced because you know what voltage it got to when you charged it until the BMS shut down. That's not perfect, but it's a way of knowing. There's tricks they could pull that would mask that, and I wouldn't put it past them. But if you don't have a Bluetooth app to know the intra-cell voltages, that's all you can do. Of course, we're going to assume we have a Bluetooth app, and we know what each cell voltage is, so let's take a look. So if we took a battery that's acceptably balanced right up to 3.65, obviously the high would still be 3.65, and I've written down some numbers here that seem reasonable. If that was my battery, I would stop attempting to charge it anymore. The delta now between the lowest cell and the highest cell is 0.1 volts. I just arbitrarily decided that was okay from some experience. If I watch the voltage of the total, just adding all those together, we get the battery shutting down at 14.37 volts. If they were all perfectly balanced and all shut down at 3.65, that would be 14.6, which is kind of that magic number. That's the limit to where you should charge. But that battery is in pretty good shape. Let's see what happens when we take it to 13.8. Now we're using it in a general way. Again, it's kind of arbitrary just from my experience, but I'm kind of taking the ratio and I'm saying that reasonable cell voltages down at 13.8 for this setup would be like 3.48, 3.46, 3.44, and 3.42. Now, notice these are really close. These are only 0.6 apart from each other because we're just down a little bit. But there's no one of them that's super high. The BMS is not shutting off. That's a little higher than it should be, but it's just not that much difference. So what we're trying to do by balancing is keeping a situation so that for normal charge voltages, we never see a cell go up to the termination. We definitely don't want to see a battery so imbalanced, and they come to me this way very often, so imbalanced that I can't even get to 13.8 without the battery shutting down and not accepting power. So we get them all balanced, they all see the same world, nobody is being sacrificed with too high of a charge, and nobody is learning memory from too low of a charge. They go through their life this way, and they can go through their life this way for quite some time. They can get out of balance on their own. Hopefully the bad, slow balancers would be able to keep them close, if they started drifting. But I think once a year, it would be good to overcharge your battery and charge it until that top cell is 3.65 and find out what voltage or difference in cell voltages you're getting. and make the decision. And if they're out of balance significantly, you go through another charge cycle. And if they're not, you don't. One of the problems with using a BMS is it doesn't periodically abuse the batteries by overcharging them. Most of the other charge setups, whatever voltage you end up using, it's usually higher than 13.8. And it's just exposing them to that cigarette smoke every cycle. The bank manager is going to keep it all calmer, but because of that, if things go out of balance, they're not going to be noticeable enough that the BMS can start charging. So for you bank manager people, there's a setting in the menu that says charge to voltage, and it will disregard its smarts about how to stop charging, and it'll act like a Victron, and it'll charge to a voltage. You can crank the voltage up a tad, and then you can do this test and see if they're in balance or not. If they're not, you keep charging a couple cycles until they are, then back to charge to 100%. Charging to 100% with a bank manager, I believe, will give you the longest life possible from the lithium batteries. That's the why. I feel like I haven't finished because I want to tell you the how, but I've already told you the how. It's already in that other video. This is why you should care. It's like I could do a video on how to change the oil in my truck, and then you'd know how to change the oil in my truck. But if you weren't convinced that if I didn't change the oil, bad things would happen, well, then why would you bother? Same thing. You do not use lithium iron phosphate batteries when they're not top balanced unless you're the same guy that would drive his truck for years and years and years and never change the oil. They're both really important for the long-term longevity. Not changing the oil is not going to kill your truck in a year, but by the time it's 15 years old, you'll know the difference. Same with these batteries. Okay, bye from Clark on Temptress. I hope this cleared things up.